Nicaragua and U.S. Involvement in the 1980s by Daniel Fried. Nicaragua is a country in Central America. Bordering it are the Caribbean Sea, the North Pacific Ocean, Costa Rica, and Honduras. Nicaragua is slightly larger than Pennsylvania and slightly smaller than New York. As of 2016, there are roughly 6 million Nicaraguans in the country. The country is reigned by a presidential republic government type. For some background on U.S. involvement, the Sandinista National Liberation Front, or FSLN, overthrew the Somoza dictatorship and led from 1979 to 1990. Previous U.S. involvement in 1912 put the Somozas in that leadership position, so they were anti-revolution. The U.S. opposed the FSLN government and backed a rebel group known as the Contras, starting the Contra War. This group had CIA involvement along with U.S. military training and funding. The Contras committed crimes and used terroristic tactics in attempt to overthrow the FSLN. In 1981, United States President Ronald Reagan signed a presidential finding which authorized covert operations in Nicaragua. The Sandinista government had close ties to the Cuban and Soviet governments, which represented a strategic threat to the U.S. There was also a bill prohibiting the direct or indirect assassination of Sandinista officials, meaning police officers, court judges, etc. Attempting to advance the Contra rebel cause, the U.S. provided a pamphlet called the Freedom Fighting Manual, teaching Contra rebels how to cause civil disruptions like slow work production and ruin gas lines, even to create Molotov cocktails. The manual violated the bill prohibiting assassinations because riots would cause enraged rebels to attack the officials. When President Reagan was confronted about the manual, he stated the CIA had men running guerrilla operations, and when asked to clarify, he went back on his word. Allegations state that the Reagan administration, along with the CIA, trafficked drugs to fund the Contra rebel group. The administration also released a 3-page report stating that there were some Contra cocaine connections in 1984 and 1985, and that these connections occurred at a time when the rebels were, quote, particularly hard-pressed for financial support. Payments to drug traffickers by the U.S. State Department of Funds was authorized by the Congress for humanitarian assistance to the Contras.
Here are the facts. On December 10, 2004, journalist Gary Webb was found dead with 2 gunshot wounds to his head in Carmichael, California. The coroner ruled the death a suicide, and Webb's ex-wife noted that he had been depressed after a falling out with his employers at the San Jose Mercury. Gary Webb was a controversial but lauded journalist. In 1996, he wrote a series of articles for the Mercury that were later made into a book called Dark Alliance. Prominent newspapers attacked this series, including the Washington Post and the New York Times. Eventually, Webb's own paper backed away from his work. Many believe that being professionally discredited drove him to suicide, and his claims were exaggerated. Yet conspiracy theorists believe Gary Webb was murdered because his story was not only true, but the beginning of an international scandal. So what did he actually write? Here's where it gets crazy. In this series, Webb alleged that Nicaraguan Contras were responsible for the Los Angeles crack cocaine epidemic of the 1980s. He also claimed that the CIA knew of these operations and, at the very least, ignored them. At worst, he alleged they actually covered up the crimes. With extensively documented sources, Gary Webb built a case that argued the Contras were able to somehow get cocaine into the U.S. and get cash out much more easily than other drug-running organizations. Without having to pay the cost of transportation, the Contras were able to sell cocaine at bargain basement prices. Webb claimed that this cheap cocaine flooded the market, enabling the crack epidemic. While these allegations were severe, they were not far-fetched. In South and Central America, it's not unusual for revolutionary groups to use the drug trade as a way to raise money.